Where are all the Hunter x Hunter games? Since the 2011 Hunter x Hunter anime started receiving an English dub and has been airing on Adult Swim's Toonami programming block, I have begun to hear this question or some variant of it more and more. The simple answer to the question is that most of them were released almost 20 years ago and never made their way outside of Japan. However, I wanted to give a more thorough answer. Therefore, this is Gaming Through the Ages, and this is the start of a video series where we're looking at every single Hunter x Hunter video game. To begin with, a little background information for anyone uninitiated. Hunter x Hunter was a manga series created in 1998 by author Yoshihiro Togashi, whose previous works included the popular shonen manga Yu Yu Hakusho. In 1999, an anime adaptation of Hunter x Hunter was made based on Togashi's manga. However, the author has had to take several hiatuses over the years due to health issues, and the anime eventually hit a stopping point when it ran out of material to adapt. It was around the time of the first airing of a Hunter x Hunter anime in 1999 that a majority of the Hunter x Hunter games which currently exist were released. A second anime was created in 2011, which was both a retelling and a continuation, as much more of the manga had been created by that point. The manga has been generally praised for its character portrayals and subversions of shonen tropes. While Togashi has had to take more time off over the years, the manga slowly continues to this day. With that information in mind, let's begin our look at the Hunter x Hunter video games with the first of the games released around the turn of the millennium. Several of the early Hunter x Hunter games were released on the handheld system known as the WonderSwan, and subsequently the WonderSwan versions which allowed for color games, the WonderSwan Color and WonderSwan Crystal. For those unfamiliar with the portable console, it was an interesting handheld created by Gunpei Yokoi after he had left Nintendo. While at Nintendo, he had famously led the creation of the Game & Watch handhelds, Game Boy, and Virtual Boy for Nintendo, among other creations and influences, before his untimely death a few short years after leaving Nintendo. The WonderSwan was released in 1999 with decent support and a nice variety of games, including notable anime licensed games, and even games as popular as the early Final Fantasy titles. Unfortunately, no versions of the system were ever officially released outside of Japan. The first Hunter x Hunter game we will be looking at is意志を継ぐ者, or Those Who Inherit Will for the original black and white WonderSwan. 意志を継ぐ者 is the most rudimentary of the WonderSwan Hunter x Hunter games, as it's in black and white and has somewhat limited gameplay. While it's a simple game, it actually has a substantial language barrier, as much of the gameplay centers on and around text. It's worth noting here that the WonderSwan has two directional pads and can be played vertically as well as in the standard horizontal orientation, and 意志を継ぐ者 takes advantage of this capability. The game begins with you playing as Gon, arriving in a port town and asking around for information about his father. You are eventually tasked with fighting a man named Majitani, whose presence makes very little sense here in context of the source material, by pressing the action button when the moving arrow is over the desired dialogue choice. For doing so, you receive a mobile computer, which I think is supposed to essentially be the Hunter card from the series. Upon opening this mobile computer card hybrid thingamajig, you turn the system sideways to navigate several menus and perform a variety of tasks. This mobile computer allows you to enter keywords for additional information which you gather by talking to non-playable characters and noting any words or phrases in brackets. After a while, you are able to unlock the ability to reserve travel tickets via different transportation methods and go to new towns, where you will find yourself gathering more keywords. There is some additional variety such as dungeon crawling, but it is just as text-based as other areas and tends to be an annoying gameplay section, as you may randomly be sent back to the first floor, thereby losing most of your progress. While the language used throughout the game is fairly simple and there is limited kanji, I imagine the game would be nigh impossible to play without some knowledge of Japanese, as you often have to manually input words and navigate a cluster of menus, so it would be extremely difficult to accidentally happen upon the right sequence of events in order to progress. 意志を継ぐ者is an interesting little game since it does a few unique things with its text-based gameplay and takes advantage of the WonderSwan hardware to do so, but overall the game is really just quite boring. The next Hunter x Hunter WonderSwan game to discuss is Soれぞれの決意, or Each One's Determination, and is actually a WonderSwan color game, meaning a WonderSwan color or crystal is required to play. The game begins quite a ways into the manga and anime, whereupon several of the characters agree to split up for the time being and meet once again at an auction in half a year. You are then able to pick between different characters and will have to go through a story chapter before being able to select another character, allowing you to play through the story in varying order. The story follows the source material very closely, so there really aren't any surprises. There are two major elements to the gameplay, the first being the ability to choose between several options such as talk, look, think, use, etc., while exploring screens of the game and progressing the story. The second is a battle system in which you are given the options of back, attack, train, and forward. Each character's position is represented on a bar above the character's sprites, and the position is affected by the back and forward options. A character can be pushed out of bounds, which can result in a game over from this mechanic in certain situations. The train option allows you to store up bars on the Nen bar with different attacks or abilities such as healing available at different amounts of the bar used. However, if an attack misses, all the bars are used up anyway, so there's a bit of risk involved. Overall, it's a simplistic and strange system, but can be surprisingly fun, and adds a bit of a natural flow to battles despite their turn-based nature. There are also occasional simple minigames, and the sideways functionality of the WonderSwan is used for a database of terms and characters from the series, but these elements feel inconsequential. While this game is text-heavy, someone who can't read any Japanese could conceivably brute force their way through it, but it may severely limit their ability to enjoy the game, as I found much of the enjoyment came from reading the dialogue of the various characters. Playing through Hisoka's chapters was particularly entertaining. However, if the battle system was the only thing someone was interested in, it may be worth trying out, but I didn't find the system compelling enough to carry the game on its own. All in all, there's not much to say about this game, as there isn't a whole lot of substance here. The next Hunter x Hunter WonderSwan game is導かれし者, or The Guided One. This game appears to be a sequel to the previous game discussed, and as such begins in the York New arc of the series upon the characters meeting up for the aforementioned auction. You are able to select segments of the city and then select characters within those segments to play out parts of the story, with more options being unlocked as you move through the city segments. There are again occasional mini-games, such as slots and arm wrestling, where you must press the A button quickly for a while, which uses up a secondary bar, which you refill by pressing the B button quickly. It's completely mindless and not very fun. After a while, you start running into the battle system from the previous game, which functions exactly the same as the previous game and still isn't very engaging. As for the WonderSwan's vertical functionality, the database is back, but now we also have an option to flip a virtual coin for some reason, as well as easy access to the options menu in case you want to turn the mini-games down to easy. The biggest issue I have with this game is that clicking on a character to see a scene will sometimes replay the previous scene, or sometimes continue on to a new one, so you feel compelled to click on each character until you've seen a scene twice, resulting in an annoying level of tedium, especially when there's several available characters and you can't remember if you've clicked on someone in that particular area recently or not. Making this even more annoying is the occasions when you do this and have to replay one of the mini-games. Overall, it's a somewhat enjoyable game, but manages to be even more text and story-driven than the previous one, increasing the language barrier, although brute forcing your way through the game is still entirely possible. This isn't necessarily a bad game, it's actually kind of a fun little RPG visual novel hybrid with minigames like the last game. However, it feels quite dated, and for most players it likely isn't going to be very accessible. Greed Island is the final Hunter x Hunter game on the WonderSwan, and as the title suggests, the game is centered on the Greed Island arc of the series. Without spoiling too much of the source material, Greed Island is the series arc most well suited to being translated into video game format, so it's refreshing to finally see one of the games attempting to adapt this story segment. The game is essentially a tactical role-playing game where you traverse various dungeons and towns, talking to NPCs to move the story along and getting into random encounters. The game also features a collectible card element, whereupon the characters collect cards through a variety of means. These cards allow the casting of a spell while using up the card and have various utilities, sometimes during encounters and sometimes outside of them, but all cards being collected is required to complete the game. The story follows the source material very closely, so if a player is familiar with the manga or anime, it could negate some of the language barrier as there will be a general understanding of how the story should progress. However, finding the correct NPCs or triggers at some points could be difficult, especially early on in the game when you are required to stay in a hotel until a certain date to progress the story. There is an old English walkthrough of the game on Game FAQs at the time of this review, and while it doesn't appear to be perfect based on my admittedly brief scan of the document, it does seem serviceable enough to allow players to get through the game. The real meat of the game is the random encounters, as that is where most time is spent, especially since the game can be quite grind-intensive. Encounters take place on an 8x3 grid, and characters have both a number of hit points and ability points based on their level. Characters are given one action per turn. These actions include Move, which generally allows a character to move one space horizontally or vertically, Ren, which allows a character to generate ability points, a Physical Attack, which costs ability points to use, Nen, which allows the character to use ability points for special attacks and buffs, Book, which opens the book of collected cards to select one to be used as an item in battle, and Heal, which allows a character to recover lost hit points in exchange for a large percentage of their ability points. For added depth, certain abilities affect different sections of the grid, and characters or enemies can be pushed off their side of the grid, causing defeat. The battle system is unique and surprisingly versatile, but it is also noticeably slow. Greed Island is graphically satisfying with vibrant colors, large character sprites in the chibi style, detailed backgrounds, and animated sprites. However, the in-game music became extremely grating after a while, especially during long encounters, and I found myself playing the game on mute more often than not. While Greed Island doesn't cover as interesting story beats as the previous two games due to the arc it adapts, the game more than makes up for it by having the most gameplay depth of any of the WonderSwan Hunter x Hunter games. Fans of classic turn-based RPGs who play Greed Island are likely to discover a satisfying, if a bit slow-paced, light-hearted tactical adventure. The first Game Boy Hunter x Hunter game we're going to look at is Kindan no Hiho, or Forbidden Treasure. This is a Game Boy Color Konami game, and it's essentially a Castlevania clone, but that's not really a complaint. It's a pretty fun, if simplistic, action RPG, and to be frank, Konami created Castlevania, so can't really say they're ripping it off. You play as Gon, wielding your fishing pole sort of like a whip, and collecting coins while leveling up your health, attack, defense, and ability points by defeating enemies. You can gain different equipment and items throughout the game by finding or purchasing them from sellers. There are also different Nen abilities to use, which are essentially magic spells such as healing, defense, and attack spells, which use up your ability points. You fight bosses and find healing rooms where you can save, which becomes especially important as the game becomes more Metroidvania-like as you progress, although it never really reaches that level of backtracking or exploration. Additionally, the language barrier is limited to being able to navigate the menus, which will likely take some time for anyone who can't read kana, but shouldn't be too overwhelming as the menu options are pretty standard RPG fare. Overall, I found this game fun, despite a slow pace and a straight-up nonsensical difficulty curve at times. That being said, you're probably better off just playing a Castlevania game, except for the Castlevania Adventure, you don't need to play that one. But if you really just want to have a Hunter x Hunter game, this is a solid choice merely for being a somewhat decent game while also having less of a language barrier than most of the other choices. On top of that, the Game Boy is a region-free game system, meaning there's no extra legwork involved in getting import games to run. Not a stellar game by any means, but if you happen to be both a Hunter x Hunter fan and a Game Boy enthusiast, this is probably the Hunter game for you. The next Hunter x Hunter game is Hunter no Kehu, or Hunter's Genealogy, and is another Konami Game Boy Color game. The game opens with a long dialogue section during which you will create a character using extremely limited customization options. There are some dialogue choices during the opening, but the choices made don't appear to make any meaningful differences. Eventually, you enter into the Hunter exam alongside characters from the source material, and will realize the game is a tactical role-playing game. In a frankly terrible decision by the game designers, you are forced to utilize turn-based, tile-limited movements for the first portion of the exam, which, true to the manga, is a foot race. This means the first several minutes of gameplay involve monotonously choosing two actions in a menu, which should probably be movement most of the time for the sake of keeping up with the crowd, so as to not get lost in a fairly large map without any distinguishing features, then tediously choosing the tiles to move over repeatedly. Oh, and waiting for the screen to load each tile strip every time you get near the edge of the screen. Compounding matters are characters that will stop your movement dead in its tracks if you happen to accidentally try to move through the same tile as them. To be fair, there are other options in the action menu, those being search, hide, item, talk, and attack. Search reveals question marks on tiles, which when walked over give the player an item, and this can be used in this opening section, as there are hidden items scattered around. The other options are fairly self-explanatory, although items features a submenu where you can synthesize two items into one. Now, you might be thinking that the game will open up and be more interesting after this initial section, but you'd be wrong. After each exam section is a bit of a dialogue with characters where you occasionally get to make a dialogue choice, but inevitably leads to the next part of the exam. The second exam section involves you searching for food for gourmet hunters. Now, the thing you are supposed to do here, which undoubtedly would be a stopping point if unable to read Japanese, is combine meat you find randomly in tiles with the search function with another type of food you also find randomly in tiles. However, after consulting some Japanese websites discussing the game, noting one of the sites was just several different people's accounts of how disappointing the game was, I was greeted by the revelation that combining the food items is glitched and sometimes just plain doesn't work. Luckily, there are several items you can combine with the meat, and if one doesn't work, another might. Once that has been completed, you move on to the third portion of the exam, which is somehow more tedious than the first. Here you have to use the search function to locate traps and then either walk over to disable them or avoid them in a massive room. Oh, and the search function doesn't quite reach the limit of the amount of tiles you can walk, so you also need to purposely walk one less tile each turn to avoid accidentally stepping on an unsearched tile. Upon reaching the southeast corner, the section is complete. Believe it or not, the next part of the exam ups the tedium to a whole new level. In this section, you must find and repeatedly attack your target until you do over 40 damage, so that they no longer move, and then you walk up to them and take their nameplate, thereby completing the section. You are not told which character is your target, but from what I read, supposedly it depends on who talks to you in the scene beforehand. If Gon, Kiroa, Kurapika, or Leorio talks to you, your target will be Hanzo or Tompa. If Hisoka talks to you, your target will be Gon, Kiroa, Kurapika, or Leorio. And if Hanzo or Tompa talks to you, your target will be Hisoka. This held true for my single playthrough of the game, but there's no way I'm going to verify all the possibilities. Also, this section of the game practically requires you to have found a ranged weapon earlier in the game to not go insane, as you will be repeatedly attacking characters that keep moving until you've done enough damage. There's also a sort of mini-game where you have to hit the A button while the cursor is over the target when you attack, but that gets old real quick. The final test pits you against a single opponent in battle, and it seems like the opponent is based on your dialogue choices immediately prior, but I'm not replaying the game to find out. The final battle consists of you repeatedly attacking your opponent while they occasionally move around the room until the game ends. That's it. They don't attack you or anything, you just hit them until the credits roll. I should also mention the game has a versus CPU mode where you load a character and choose which exam portion to take on, as well as a versus other player and trade mode accessed with the Game Boy Link cable, but why you would subject a friend to this game is well beyond my scope of understanding. At this point, you may be wondering why what has been the longest Hunter x Hunter review up to this point has been dedicated to the worst of the Hunter x Hunter games thus far. And that's simply because I don't want anyone to get the impression that there's any redeeming qualities to be found here. I have described the entire gameplay experience. It is not worth playing. Mina Tomodachi Daisaksen, or Operation All My Friends, is the last of the Hunter x Hunter Game Boy entries for us to look at, and is actually a Game Boy Advance game. This game is fairly unique, and can best be described as a simulation game where none of the things you simulate are particularly enjoyable. You begin the game by creating your own hunter avatar and beginning at your new home. Essentially, from here on out, the game consists of mundane tasks, which raise the percentage completion of various types of hunter, such as clean hunter, remove hunter, repair hunter, dig hunter, and friend hunter, among some others. All these consist of using tools you gain during the game to complete said tasks. However, many are overwhelmingly tedious, such as using a broom or mop to clean various parts of the game world. At first glance, it appears Friend Hunter is moving along a narrative because it involves you talking to various characters from the source material and joining them on a quest. However, you'll soon come to realize that every quest is essentially the same, with differences almost entirely reliant on character interactions, with the exception of a very short final quest. There are some minigames during these portions. Alas, there are no consequences for losing these minigames or rewards for winning them. In fact, with only one exception I can think of, the game just continues when you lose a minigame exactly as if you had won. It's worth noting the friend quests do also sometimes allow you to gain new tools, with perhaps the most influential being the bow and arrow from Kurapika's quest, as this tool unlocks a minigame where you can capture monsters which can be sold for a decent price, which gives way to the other huge aspect of this game, avatar customization. Essentially, the game world is full of stores with shelves lined with all sorts of knickknacks and outfits for you to play dress up. As for the other tools available, to begin with, there's a sound recorder for recording sounds you hear in the game world like birds chirping, to be used when mixing music tracks, as the ability to mix sounds, instruments, and character voices together seems to be a feature the game developers were very much pushing, even though it's entirely optional. There's also a fishing pole, which unlocks a horrible fishing minigame, a cleaning cloth which functions virtually the same as the mop and broom, a shovel you gain early on which allows you to dig up pictures scattered throughout the world, a repair tool which is also essentially the same as the broom and mop since it just fixes up broken things in the game world like the cleaning supplies clean up things, and finally there's a building kit tool. The building kit is for building houses on various spaces in the game world, but is used up with each house built, and you must plant and harvest trees until you have 50 lumber again to regain the tool each and every time you use it. There's also a mail system in the game where the characters can send you messages and you can compose messages to send them. If you happen to include the right keywords, you can also trigger a message back, but the game doesn't give any indication of the keywords, so you're left to rely on your knowledge of the source material, and it's really just not worth the effort. Despite all the flaws of this game, I do commend it for its voice acting during the friend quests, as the character interactions were lighthearted, and I actually found at least Uvogen's quest pretty entertaining. I would actually recommend this game for upper beginners of Japanese who have a decent vocabulary under their belt, as most of the game is fairly simple and can be played quite leisurely. As far as I can tell, there's no way to actually lose the game, and it appears to continue indefinitely even after completing all the friend quests and many other tasks. You could conceivably just pick up the game and wander around talking to NPCs and shopping to do a little light Japanese reading practice. Now, by no means am I saying this is a good game. In my opinion, it's not. I'm recommending it the same way I would recommend a children's book that I find mediocre but passable for certain levels of reading comprehension. We're moving on to Hunter x Hunter console games for the time being with Ubawareta Aura Stone, or the Stolen Aura Stone for the original PlayStation. The back of the game case boasts a synthesis of real-time simulation and card battles. Upon beginning the game, you are greeted with Hisoka asking you to name your character and answer a series of questions which determine the status of your Nen types. This is immediately followed by a scene of the Phantom Troop raiding your home village to steal the Aura Stone, the vital treasure of your village and a sort of lifelink for the inhabitants therein. You play the game as a young warrior who must set out on a journey to retrieve the Aura Stone and save your village. Soon you're thrown into an unwinnable and, quite frankly, confusing battle with a tiger, but are picked up with Netero in the Hunter Association's airship. Netero reveals that it was most likely the Phantom Troop who stole the Aura Stone, as the protagonist has no way of knowing who they are. Netero and some of the current examiners of the Hunter exam decide to help you on your journey, and you are placed on the world map where you are able to select areas or save the game via a diary in the corner of the screen. The first area in the game is a tutorial, during which several characters explain the battle system, which has the potential to seem quite convoluted and fairly unapproachable until its idiosyncrasies are understood, so prepare yourself. Each random encounter in the game is a card battle with an opponent. Both the player's character and the opponent start with a hand of cards, with the number of cards in the initial hand varying based on the status of the hand after previous encounters. The cards are numbered 0 through 9 in black on the upper left and lower right corners, and each card features a kanji for a type of nen, which you can think of as the card's suit. Additionally, a blinking number appears in the middle of cards, which is the actual number the card will be played as. The number is determined by the nen type percentages of your character. For instance, if your character has 100% as an emitter type, but a 50% as a conjurer type, an 8 card of the emitter suit will still count as an 8, while an 8 card of the conjurer suit will still act as a 4. Nen type percentages or affiliations slowly increase as types are played during battles, making cards increase in potency as characters gain experience. There are also 3 kanji which represent the battling character's stats, which you can increase when a level up occurs. From left to right they are Power, Body, and Nen. Power increases regular attacks, Body increases the chance of cards being put into your hand as the stat increases, and Nen Power increases the potency of special attacks. Each turn the player's character and opponent face off by choosing up to 5 cards from their hand. You can press start to face off with less than 5 cards chosen, which increases the amount of cards replenished in your hand after the turn. Depending on the cards chosen, 3 types of attacks can occur, those being regular, special, and counter attacks. Note that there's a bit of a rock, paper, scissors dynamic inherent in these attacks. Normal attacks are fairly common, and if 2 of them clash, the blinking numbers in each hand and the power stat of each character respectively are added up. The character with the higher number wins the face-off, and the difference between the player's character and the opponent's totals is subtracted from the hit points of the character who had the lesser total. A special attack occurs when 4 or more cards with the same original black number are played, and is increased by the Nen stat. However, in the case of these special attacks, the lower the blinking numbers on the cards, the higher the damage done to the opponent. When a special attack faces off with a normal attack, the normal attack does no damage. If 2 special attacks clash, the player has a short few seconds to select a card they think is higher than the opponent's, and if so, their attack wins, but if no card is selected in time, the player automatically loses the face-off. This also happens in the case of 2 regular attacks having the same total. Finally, a counter-attack occurs if 2 cards having the same original number are combined with 3 cards having the same original number, such as 2 5 cards with 3 7 cards, just like a full house in poker. A counterattack can also be triggered by playing 5 cards or in some cases 3 cards at once, which all have the same Nen type. Special attacks do no damage if they face off against a counterattack, and counterattacks do no damage if they face off against regular attacks, hence the earlier reference to rock, paper, scissors. Generally, 3 of the opponent's cards can be seen, and if you see 2 or 3 of the same numbered cards, you want to make a guess what type of attack the opponent is going for and respond appropriately. Despite the long-winded explanation, the battle system becomes second nature after playing the game for a while, and can be quite fun, as battles with opponents who seem to completely outclass you can be swung wildly in your favor should you be able to play the right cards at the right time. The battle system is the core of the gameplay, but aside from the battles, the game is progressed by selecting locations on the world map and undergoing missions. Each time you select a location, you pick characters to bring with from a roster, which increases over the course of the game, with the protagonist being mandatory. Usually you can pick 4 characters and use additional characters for support by placing them behind the frontline characters. Different characters have different amounts of support units which can be attached to them. Support characters additionally throw cards into your hand, but I often found they screwed things up by changing your attack type into something you didn't necessarily want. Some characters are supportive units only, but all characters can be used as support. Additionally, when choosing units, you are given a menu consisting of, from top to bottom, add member, remove member, check status, manage equipment, manage cards, or confirm entering the location. Once you are on a map, you are given a mission if there is currently a mission within the location to advance the story. Upon selecting characters, you are given a command menu consisting of the options move, item, equipment, status, and card. You can select where the characters move on the map, and they move towards their goals with random encounters along the way on most maps. Characters can talk to NPCs or enter buildings marked with signs above them. Buildings generally consist of hotels, which will replenish characters' HP for a small amount of Jenny, which is gained after battles. Bars where you can talk to additional NPCs, or shops where you can buy healing items, equipment to alter stats, or items which have various battle effects such as lowering or increasing chances of certain cards. Making progress in the game is usually a case of talking to the right characters in the right order, often causing the next character you need to talk to appear on the map. However, many times characters need to talk specifically to the protagonist for the next step to appear. There was also a case where you needed to walk through the correct area of the map to find an item on the ground after a character agreed to help you search for it, and a case early on where you needed to exterminate creatures on the screen via card battles. Overall, I found this game pretty enjoyable, mostly for the fact that I had never played anything quite like it before, and I found the card game had a relaxing rhythm to it interspersed with tense moments. I also found running into various characters from the series enjoyable. Last of all, the music in the game is the best I have heard in any of the Hunter x Hunter games thus far, and overall, the game was really just a breath of fresh air. While there is a language barrier here, it's surmountable if you find the battle system engaging and are willing to put in the work learning the menus. Just know you'll be in for a substantial amount of time watching your little character sprites slowly meander about the maps. The second Hunter x Hunter game on the original PlayStation was Mabaroshi no Greed Island, or Phantom of Greed Island, although the connections to the Greed Island story arc are somewhat tenuous. The game begins with picking a name for an original protagonist and then choosing one of the following weapons: sword, whip, iron, claws, or shortbow. Aside from the shortbow being ranged, the major difference between most of the weapons is in the attack animation and upgrade materials required to level them up. After the opening section, the game thrusts the player into a town menu. This is the first town of the game and introduces the player to the concept that all interactions outside of dungeons are menu-based. The town menu in this first port city consists of, from top to bottom, the second-hand shop, the bar, the dojo, and the Hunter Association, with the association being unique to this town. The second-hand shop is where you can purchase or sell weapons, strengthen or level up equipment, and store items. The bar includes a bank where you can deposit and withdraw money, gain information by talking to characters, and re-recruit characters who are not currently in your party. The dojo allows characters to trade nen points they have accumulated in dungeons for new nen abilities. As for the Hunter Association, general information can be provided about the game and various quests can be obtained. From the town menu, the player can back out into the world map, which unlocks section by section as the player completes dungeons, and back out further to a menu which has the options to move, camp, configure, or save load the game. The camp menu opens the standard RPG menu, whereby players can manage items, equipment, stats, quests, and party members. Most time in the game is spent dungeon crawling through floors which, while having nice environmental variety, are almost always merely several square rooms connected by one tile-wide hallways. Occasionally, some of the floors have light puzzle elements such as switches or warp tiles, but they're overall not very engaging. Additionally, floors have items and gold visible to pick up, but also have hidden traps which can cause damage or status effects. At first glance, the game looks as if it could be an action RPG, but it's actually turn-based, as every attack or one-tile movement counts as one action, and enemies and characters take actions in turn. Each character has hit points and ability points, which slowly rise with movement. Ability points are used to perform nen abilities, and using these abilities increases nen points. to be traded for new nen abilities in towns. Every time the player enters a dungeon, the character begins at level 1 and on floor 1, although the dungeons typically don't have many floors. As such, noticeable increases in character strengths come primarily from upgrading or purchasing new equipment. When the player completes all floors of a dungeon, they earn all items and money found. However, if the player dies in a dungeon, all items and half of their current money is lost, making the ability to store items and money in towns highly useful. One of the more interesting aspects of the game is that it is not only multiplayer, but multi-tap compatible, meaning 4 players can control the 4 characters separately. While an interesting mechanic in theory, I found it to be frustrating in practice, since each player gets 1 action per turn, often moving 1 tile as their action, which severely slows down the pace of the game when compared to single player, where the additional characters automatically move and act. That being said, this was one of the more enjoyable Hunter x Hunter games I played, and has a lighter language barrier than some of the others due to it being a fairly simplistic dungeon crawler. Dungeon crawlers that are much more engaging and have substantially more depth exist in large quantities, but this would be an alright introduction to the genre for someone worrying about being overwhelmed. The next Hunter x Hunter game to look at is Ryumyaku no Saidan, or Altar of the Dragon for PlayStation 2. Altar of the Dragon is an action-adventure game with some light RPG elements. Using Netero's airship as a sort of hub, the player can choose 2 characters to take to various areas of the map as the story unfolds. I found it interesting that these can generally be any 2 characters currently available, and the player isn't always stuck with the same protagonists. During the escapades to different areas on the map screen, the player fights numerous enemies and can obtain various items such as healing herbs, but the real meat of the gameplay here is a fairly simple combat system. Players control 1 character while the other is controlled by artificial intelligence. The player control character has both a life bar and an aura bar. The life bar decreases as enemies' hits connect, but also refills when standing still or when picking up orbs sometimes dropped by felled creatures. The aura bar underneath decreases with every attack and constantly refills. The player has 2 different 3-button combos performed with the triangle and square buttons respectively, which cannot be combined, a jump attack with circle, and a simple jump with the X button. Furthermore, a powerful attack can be performed with L1 but is limited to 3 uses until refilled, and R1 allows locking on enemies. The maps are often very large and filled with enemies, making them somewhat annoying to navigate, as I often wished for more visual range when much of an area looks alike. That being said, the player can bring up a map of explored areas by pressing select, albeit a bare bones map. Areas tend to have plenty of destroyable objects scattered about, which have the potential to contain both items and traps. Additionally, many of the enemies' attacks are varied, with several having different types of projectiles and different approaches required should the player wish to dispatch them most efficiently, and the game does feature some fun boss fights interspersed throughout the story. To quickly clarify the game menu for anyone who decides to try their hand at it, it features sections for status, items, map, change, save, load, and options, with map, change, and save unavailable when adventuring in areas outside of the airship. Although this is a fairly average, if not a bit underwhelming, action game, the game's saving grace is the speed at which it plays. I found it remained just compelling enough to keep me going, primarily due to the quickness with which I could traverse areas and smack enemies around. As for the light RPG elements, characters' life, aura, attack, and speed all increase after leaving a map area of the game based on how many enemies were defeated within that area. This makes grinding a viable tactic should any part of the game feel too taxing, but I never found that to be necessary during my playthrough. Aside from these aspects, the game's entirely middling in its presentation, with music, graphics, and stories simply serving as passable. Although the story is original, it's not understandable without some Japanese reading comprehension, and not interesting enough to warrant much investment from the player regardless. Overall, the game is certainly playable, even without any knowledge of the Japanese language due to its nature as a basic action game, but it's representative of the problem which plagues many of the anime licensed games of this era, and, frankly, every era. Every aspect of the game is marred by mediocrity, which is a shame considering it was Konami putting forth the game. Many years after the turn-of-the-century slew of Hunter x Hunter games, the 2011 adaptation of the anime began to air and Wonder Adventure for the PlayStation Portable was released. Upon loading up the game, the player is presented with two options, Story Mode and Shop. The shop allows the player to spend money earned on missions to purchase accessories. These accessories can then be equipped onto playable characters to increase various stats such as defense, health, and attack power. After completing the first story mission of the game, an additional main menu category unlocks called Mission Mode, where the player can enter single or two-player side missions to earn further money. The biggest issue with the game becomes evident as soon as the first story mission starts. Due to the PlayStation Portable only having a single analog stick, which moves the playable character around, the manual camera control is relegated to the left and right directional pad buttons above the analog stick. I often found myself trying to use both simultaneously by doing a sort of claw maneuver with my thumb and index finger, which can be quite painful. The automatic movement of the camera attempts to compensate by rotating right or left along with the character movement, which does help considerably at times, but I still found myself annoyed with the camera more often than not. However, this is more a limitation of the hardware rather than a fault with the game itself. I would have no issues with the camera if it were able to be mapped to right and left on a secondary analog stick instead of the directional pad. As for the actual gameplay, characters can jump, dash, attack, use a strong attack, and guard to battle various creatures from the series and move about the game walk. Additionally, each playable character has a unique ability which can sometimes be used in fights with enemies or to traverse the environment. For instance, Gon has his signature fishing pole, which can be used to hit enemy creatures or to swing from branches throughout the game, while Kirua can use his skateboard to attack or perform jumps off of ramps located in some of the stages. The game is a combination between puzzle platformer and brawler, where the player is often switching between two characters during missions to use their respective abilities to solve puzzles. While the puzzles do become a bit repetitive and I never found them very difficult, the game does feature boss battles and occasional odd areas such as a running segment, which helps keep the game from feeling too stale. As for the story, it's a well-done retelling of the first couple narrative arcs of the series. While the music and voice acting are great, it's unfortunate that a game which coincided with the updated 2011 anime doesn't cover as much of the story as even the 1999 anime did. That being said, it seems like the creators were going for a light-hearted tone when creating this game, which would clash considerably with the thematic elements of the next story segment if the game did move further into the story. Overall, although the camera can be annoying and the difficulty curve is a little sporadic, this is the most fun I've had with a Hunter x Hunter game so far, and it definitely exceeds the PlayStation 2 game in terms of a good action platforming game. Additionally, the language barrier can be easily surpassed through some trial and error in the menus for anyone who doesn't read Japanese. Out of all the Hunter x Hunter imports we've looked at on the channel thus far, this would be my recommendation for someone looking to import a Hunter game, as the language barrier is surmountable, and the PlayStation Portable is a region-free system. The last of the Hunter x Hunter games we have to look at are the handful of ones I didn't feel warranted a full review or detailed analysis, but should still be mentioned and looked at as part of the series. The first of them is Hunter x Hunter Greed Adventure, which as far as I can tell is also unofficially known as Greed Island 2. Although there have been other Hunter x Hunter cell phone games, this is the only one I can find a way to play at the time I'm preparing this review, so it's the one we'll take a look at. The game is currently only available in Japan, but there are ways to play the game in other regions. Right off the bat, I'm impressed by the MMO-style hub world, but admittedly, I have a fairly old Android phone and never really became invested in cell phone games, so I'm probably easily impressed. The top menu of the screen features the following clickable symbols: Shop, Notification, Mission, and Post, where Shop lets you spend real money for in-game items, Notifications is precisely as it sounds, Mission is various things you can do in-game for rewards, and I would assume you receive messages in Post, but I didn't play the game long enough to receive any. The bottom menu consists of Home, Composition, Quest, Gacha, and Menu, while the lowest portion of the screen features Chat, an area to type, Stamp, and Chat Channel. Home returns you from any submenu. Composition takes you to the team composition, character select, card composition, and character list options. Quest takes you to various story quests to complete. Gacha allows you to use your in-game currencies to unlock random character cards. And menu takes you to various options such as help, system settings, account transfer, and other things of that nature. Teams consist of 3 characters, each of whom can have 3 additional attached character cards. The player gains experience for characters by playing through quests, which consist of story segments interspersed with battle segments. The story segments consist of truncated versions of the source material as well as original stories. It's worth noting that the story segments are skippable for players uninterested, but the segment still needs to be loaded before the skip option is available. Additionally, in the character menu, the player can level up character stats using chips received through playing the game. During the battle segments, characters automatically attack creatures, but the player can swipe across the screen and make the characters move into different positions to avoid enemy attacks. The player can also switch between characters by tapping the character's icon or perform special attacks by tapping the lower left circle, which has a cooldown time in between each use. The cards attached to a given character also become special attacks for whichever character they're attached to, and function in the same manner, aside from also requiring ability points, which constantly regenerate up to the character's maximum. These attachment cards can also level up by fusing them with experience card drops from missions or other character cards. Also, each character has a rock, paper, scissors affiliation, making them more or less effective against enemies who also have a type affiliation. As the player progresses through the story mode, various events unlock, including raid-style bosses and stages where 3 additional players can join in trying to defeat the event. By completing various events, the player can unlock new characters to use or obtain character coins, which allow the player to unlock a character for use once a given number of the coins are collected. Out of all the Hunter x Hunter games we've looked at so far, this is the one I keep coming back to just for the fact that it's easy to jump in and out of quickly whenever I can spare a couple minutes. While the game is definitely lacking in depth compared to many of the other games, and I personally dislike the random draw factor of games like these, there's no question that the creators of Great Adventure have a fondness for the source material. Aside from the phone games, there was a free browser MMORPG released in 2017 known as Hunter Online. After signing up, a flash game can be launched where the player chooses a gender, enters a name, and begins. The biggest draw for the game has to be that it's in English and has over 200 servers. However, the game is very simple and seems to rely heavily on selling in-game currencies since it's free to play. All of the traditional MMORPG elements seem to be there, such as chats, guilds, quests, and a friend system. There also appears to be a large community with forums and guides accessible from the site. It should be noted that the footage here is going to be quite laggy, which seems to be much more due to add-ons installed on my browser than the game itself. The game played much smoother when I tested it on a fresh install on Firefox later, but did still suffer from slowdown on occasion. Throughout the game, the player enters battles using heroes, which are recruitable characters from the series represented by cards. The heroes can be leveled up and upgraded using rewards for completing in-game story quests. There is also a slot machine-style draw where the player has a chance to earn characters with limited free attempts or attempts using in-game currency. Gameplay in Hunter Online essentially boils down to a cycle of entering into battles, claiming the rewards, and upgrading your heroes with those rewards. Battles are automatic unless specifically toggled to manual, but manual just means you click on enemies to attack and click on your heroes to use their specials when the meter is full, so all the player is really doing is making the battles longer. There are also various events and several different forms of gameplay modes to unlock resources in solo mode, which unlock as you level up during the game, and that tends to keep the game from becoming too stale too quickly. Overall, the game can be a fun little online distraction, but didn't keep my attention or draw me in very much, and I personally wouldn't invest real-world money into this game, but I'm also not surprised some players choose to do so. It's certainly not as encompassing as a full-fledged game is, but it's free and seems to be a fun community for some fans of the series to sink time into leisurely and goof around. I say if it seems interesting, then take a few moments to check it out and decide for yourself. Additionally, some of the Hunter games we didn't look at were compilation-style games, that is, cell phone games where Hunter characters are available, or games like J-Stars, which is a compilation game with many different anime characters featuring characters like Gon and Hisoka in a fighting game environment. Since these aren't full-fledged Hunter x Hunter games and just feature characters, we didn't look at any of them, but they are out there and they exist. And if you're interested in those kind of compilation games, Jumpstars is a pretty fun one. Check them out. Now, for the final Hunter x Hunter game, which needs no introduction, but is going to get one anyway. Here it is, the pinnacle of digital perfection, the Olympus of video game software, the apex of creative endeavors, the zenith of anime interactivity. It's the game where you can seduce the hunka hunka himself. That's right, it's Tender Love and Care, a Leorio dating sim. And of course, let's not forget the sequel, Tompa Quest. Kidding aside, TLC and Tompa Quest are entertaining fan-made creations, which I found quite humorous, and due to the simplicity, humor, and the fact that they're freely available, I would be remiss not to mention them. That being said, I think they're simply better off being played than reviewed or discussed, so I'll be uploading my own playthroughs of them on the channel if I haven't already, and recommend you play them yourself if you're interested. So with that, we've looked at every single Hunter x Hunter game available at the time of this recording. I hope all of the viewers who have made it through to the end have enjoyed this trip through Hunter x Hunter game history as much as I have. If you enjoyed the videos, please drop a like, subscribe, all that jazz. I think YouTube does something with a bell now. But I will also be editing the videos together into one review video. So if you prefer to watch them all at once, or would like to go back and look at any of them, that will be an option. Most of all, I just want to say thank you for watching this channel.